glamorous audience here today. Welcome to the first ever Oud Fashion Talks, held here in the stunning Sheikh Jabbar Al Ahmed Cultural Center. For the first time, Kuwait is bringing together game-changing insiders from the fashion industry, both on stage, speaking to us today, here inside the audience, and exhibiting upstairs alongside today's talks. My name is Louise Nicol. I'm a journalist who has worked in the Gulf, covering luxury fashion since 2005. Kuwait has always symbolized a daring, bold, modern approach to fashion, which we saw in earnest at the glamorous gala last night. Elegant and energizing is how I left that gala feeling. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Gulf Bank, Zain, Ali Al Ghanim and Sons, and Tamdeen Group, as well as, of course, our organizer, Oud.com, under the vision of the powerhouse Zainab Abdul Al-Razak and her wonderful team of women for putting this deserved spotlight on Kuwait and opening the important discussion around Kuwait's potential as a fashion center. As I said, everyone in this room plays a crucial role in shaping the fashion industry here in Kuwait, across the GCC and globally, from communicators and creators to investors and innovators. We all play a part in determining the role that Kuwait and the region play in the global fashion industry, an industry worth in excess of $2.5 trillion worldwide. Because fashion is a force. It drives culture, it drives commerce, it drives creativity. It touches everyone every day. Because of that, the industry is under increasing scrutiny for its sustainability efforts, as we all look to build a future where conscious consumption underpins growth. It's important that today echoes this recognition of the urgent need to ensure that governmental, institutional, and individual approaches to fashion acknowledge the responsibility we all have to create a sustainable future. Of course, sustainability comes in many guises, and I know that today's speakers will be enlightening us as the day progresses. Which leads me neatly to our first speaker, whose industry-leading fashion media company has just released its 2022 Sustainability Index. Imran Ahmed is the founder and chief executive of the Business of Fashion. He is one of the global fashion industry's leading writers, thinkers, and commentators. The Business of Fashion is a truly modern media company and the authoritative voice of the fashion industry globally. It is Imran's first time here in Kuwait, and where he goes, the fashion industry's eyes follow. We are thrilled that he is here in Kuwait today. So I'm going to start by asking Imran some questions, and then I will turn it over to the floor for a limited number of brief, concise questions. So please do get thinking about what you might like to ask Imran later. Imran Ahmed from the Business of Fashion, a warm welcome, please. Thank you so much, Imran, for being here today.
Thank you, Louise.
And joining us for your first time in Kuwait. So, Imran, I would like to start by explaining to everyone here exactly what Business of Fashion is, why it is so game-changing, and how you came to create it.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming this morning and for the kind invitation from Oud.com to have me here in Kuwait. As Louise mentioned, it's my first time here, so it always presents an interesting opportunity to learn. Before the pandemic, I was able to travel a lot more. I had to do some analysis, and I traveled 150 days a year on average. So I am very excited to be back out in the world, experiencing new things and meeting new people. So first of all, thank you for having me. As it pertains to the business of fashion, how did it happen and how was it created? I had been in a career for some time in management consulting. I'd been trained, and educated in business for my entire career. And I was turning 30 years old, and was thinking about the next steps in my career. And I was, although I'd taken a lot out of my career in management consulting, I just didn't feel the fire in my belly every day. And I wanted to do work that I found more exciting. And growing up, I had been trained in the performing arts, in drama and public speaking and musical theater. And I was looking for a way of really combining my interest in creative things with my analytical skills. And I explored a whole bunch of industries, actually. I looked at fashion, and I looked at music, and I looked at film and television, but something just kept drawing me back towards fashion. So I started an incubator for young fashion designers, and we're going to be talking to some young fashion designers later. But I was really interested in London, we have all of these amazing fashion schools like Central St. Martin's and the London College of Fashion and the Royal College of Art. And I'd started meeting all these young fashion designers. And as someone who knew nothing about fashion, they would show up at these, coffees that the British Fashion Council set up for me, and they'd show up with these like piles of press. And then they'd have, all sorts of, anecdotes about celebrities and all these people wearing their clothes, but they had no idea how to turn all of that attention into a business. And the more I spoke to people in the fashion industry, the more I learned that there was this like kind of massive gulf between, on one hand, the creative people who kind of, make this fashion and create the fashion that we see, and the business people who kind of run the fashion industry and make it work. And I imagined myself kind of as a bridge between the creative side of fashion and the business side of fashion. So I created this incubator to support these designers, and as all entrepreneurs will learn at some point in their career, that failed. It lasted about 8 months. And I, obviously was disappointed, and as someone who'd been like an overachiever my whole life, it was like hard to experience a failure. But in having had that first 8 months of experience, I've met so many interesting people, and I was like, well, there's just something in here for me. I had also been keeping a blog for my friends and family behind a password. And if you think back to 2006, blogs were kind of the first form of social media, right? This was before Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these social media networks really took off. And so I took the password off that blog, and I deleted all of my old posts, and I just started writing. And that was in January 2007. And almost immediately when I started writing, I started getting feedback. And I was talking to some of you last night who kindly came up to me and told me about when you first started reading BOF. I mean, the reason I continued to write was because I was just getting all of this really positive, encouraging feedback. So all of that to say, like, BOF was not created or launched as a company. It was really just like a passion project. And by 2013, it had really taken on a life of its own. So that's when the business properly was set up. And the vision and the mission back in 2013 was to open, inform, and connect the global fashion community. And in that community, by that point in my time doing BOF, I'd learned that the way the fashion industry is often portrayed in the media is by focusing on just the creative people and focusing just on the West. So North America, Europe, and maybe Japan at that stage. But what had become really clear to me was the fashion industry is this global industry, and it is an industry that so many people participate in. If you think right to the beginning of, farming cotton in a field, to weaving fabrics, to manufacturing clothes, to designing things, to selling things, to marketing things, to retailing things. Like, the fashion supply chain is vast. Something like 100 million people in the world work in the fashion industry. right? And so our mission and vision, since 2013 has been to bring this entire community of people together and to create a resource that people could trust and look to, and which considered the business side of fashion, the creative side of fashion, which brought together all of the different markets around the world. So not just the West, but also the Middle East and South America, Latin America, India, China, Asia Pacific, and then also to be able to ask the industry tough questions and to be able to push and advance the industry forward. Because the other thing I noticed about the media at the time that was covering the fashion industry, it was, let's just say, it was very supportive. And it was really about celebrating fashion. And of course, there's room for that. But as an industry that's as big and influential as fashion, I think this industry also has a responsibility, and a responsibility to the people who work in its supply chain, a responsibility to be honest and transparent with customers, and to think about the impact that the industry has on the planet. And so we are now a team of about 100 people, and we're based across London and New York and Los Angeles and Milan and Shanghai and Paris. And yeah, that's kind of the mission of the company and why it exists.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks, Imran. That was a great summary. Yeah. So for those of us who are maybe not from a fashion background, why should we care? Beyond the pretty dresses, beyond the celebrities, beyond the glamour, why is fashion an important industry for people to consider who may not be part of that world?
Yeah. It's such an important question, and I spend a lot of my time outside the fashion industry. In fact, I think that's part of the value of what we try to do at BOF is we don't sit within the bubble or the echo chamber of the fashion industry. We make a real effort, to connect with and spend time in other sectors and other places. But the most curious thing happens. So when I go to a conference like TED, for example, which happens in Vancouver, where my family lives, so I try to go to TED quite a bit. If I tell someone that I work in the fashion industry, let's just say sometimes they kind of roll their eyes, or they instantly assume that I must be superficial or not very smart, or that I don't have a brain, basically, that I'm not a thoughtful individual. And they often don't understand the impact and influence and power that fashion has, not just as a business, but also as a cultural force. And so the reason I think fashion is important is, of course, it is a $2.5 trillion industry. It does employ 100 million people around the world. It does touch every single country. If you go to any country in the world, the fashion industry is present. There is some manufacturing or design or certainly retail present in that industry. So the fashion industry exists literally in every country in the world. And there's not very many industries that you can say have that kind of global reach. But on top of that, fashion is an image-driven industry. And yes, it's glossy, and oftentimes we're focused on celebrities and fashion shows, but fashion also has power. I really believe fashion has power to influence and change the world. Because especially in the age of social media, which social media is an image-driven platform. It's driven through videos or images that we all share. What we wear, why we wear it, what we say by what we're wearing. There's meaning and importance in that. And I think really clever people who understand the power of fashion have also understood how they can use what they wear to impact the world. So, I was just talking with one of my colleagues here about the music industry. And if you look at the way musicians have historically used fashion to portray and project an image, it's kind of incredible, right? So I grew up in the 80s, and I think about Madonna, right? And yes, Madonna is an icon, and Madonna's been around for decades. And in fact, I saw Madonna at a fashion show in London last week. So she clearly really is still interested in fashion. Why was she at the Central St. Martin's fashion show? Because she understands the power of using fashion as an image and creating an image. But the new layer we have upon that, and if you talk to, speaking to a lot of the designers last night, if you talk to a lot of younger generations, they also understand that fashion has a responsibility to be more sustainable and to be more responsible, generally about how it exists as a business. And so what we wear is not just about the image of what we wear, it's also about how we choose what we wear. And I think the more that anyone, whether they're working in the fashion industry or whether they're a consumer or a fan of fashion, the more that we're thoughtful and purposeful and intentional about what we wear, the more we can use fashion to have like a really positive impact on the world. So that's why I think fashion is important.
Yeah. And beyond the individual, it plays into a national identity almost as well. When you think of Paris, you think of haute couture, you might think of Italian glamour. So it also has a role, would you agree, on a national stage in how nations present themselves to the world?
Absolutely. And so probably the best example of that is if you think of the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, right? And you think about when all of the athletes are entering the stadium and waving flags and kind of representing their country. That is quite literally, a kind of a visual representation of what that country stands for. So it might be as simple as dressing in the colors of their flag, or it might be, heritage dress or traditional dress from that culture. But some countries, as you say, have really made that into an art form. So if you think about Paris, or if you think about Milan and made in Italy, and how certain countries have built entire industries and cultural industries and almost like national branding around their fashion industry, it can be hugely powerful. Sadly, I think, if I'm honest, I think a lot of countries haven't really understood the power that fashion has to really convey culture and identity. And we have problems in our industry insofar as Western countries have traditionally and are still appropriating culture from other places. And in part that's problematic because Western countries are taking things from elsewhere and projecting as their own. But in part it's because countries not in the West, and my family is from East Africa and I'm of Indian heritage, so I speak about this from a personal lived experience, which is, I can see Indian clothes being represented in Western media and being appropriated and shown in a way that's not consistent or accurate. So recently, who's a Sex and the City fan? Does everyone watch Sex? Yeah. So recently there was this episode called in the new series called "And Just Like That," and one of the characters is inviting Carrie to go to an Indian Diwali dinner. And in that episode, she speaks about trying to find a sari to wear to that Indian dinner. And then what she actually wears is a lehenga. But this is never made clear. And so for any Indian person watching, the difference between a sari and a lehenga is very, very clear. But sadly, that wasn't made clear to the viewers of this show. And so the reason I bring that up is because if non-Western countries don't really take ownership of their own fashion, their own heritage, their own way of dressing, then oftentimes we let other people tell our stories. And I think it's really, really important as the world is becoming increasingly globalized and as we are becoming more integrated as a global society, that we don't lose our local culture. And I think that's really important here in the Middle East as well. So, I think, every country should write their own fashion story. And there's really a lot of power in telling stories from your own perspective, from your own cultural heritage and tradition, because, clothing has been around since the beginning of time. Mankind has almost always worn clothing. And so if we can tell our own stories, there's real power in that.
So what does that mean for a country like Kuwait and the wider GCC as well? We have very powerful consumer spending power, strong retail industry. The domestic fashion industry perhaps still has some way to go. What, from your position in London, how is the industry in the Middle East viewed, and what's the potential? What would you advise we should do?
So that's a big question.
It is.
And I've only been in Kuwait for 36 hours, so I can't profess to be an expert. But yesterday, in between, doing some meetings here and the dinner last night, I was doing some phone calls and meetings with colleagues back in Europe. And, I told a couple of them, oh, I'm in Kuwait. And the reaction was really interesting, right? The first question was, well, why are you in Kuwait? I said, oh, I'm here for this, conference, and they're bringing together some leaders from the fashion industry in the Middle East, and I've been really honored to be invited. And then the second reaction was, well, one person said to me, well, I have no idea, like no image enters my head when I think about Kuwait. And I've been thinking about that since that person said that to me last night, because I think there's a real opportunity in that, right? I think, honestly, I think a lot of people, for those of us who were around, when the invasion happened in the early 90s, I think we have an image in our head of tanks rolling into Kuwait, right? And that's, like, I think maybe the last time Kuwait has been in the global consciousness, right? Because Kuwait, in the last few years, we've seen other countries in this region really invest in developing an image externally about the fashion industry in their countries. So in Qatar, in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, you see that there's real investment and effort going in to kind of developing an understanding of what those local markets are, not just for people in those markets, for people outside those markets. And so I think of it as a little bit of a blank slate, right? There's a real opportunity because this person said to me, I have no impression in my head about Kuwait. And they didn't say that, by the way, with malice. They said it with curiosity. Like, what is it like? And, over the last 36 hours as I've been here and I've been talking to so many of you, it really reminded me that when I first started exploring fashion, there was a store here called Villa Moda, and that store was famous. Everywhere I went, when I was doing my research and I was talking to young designers, they would speak to me with pride saying, I'm stocked in Colette, and I'm stocked in Browns in London, and I'm stocked in Villa Moda. And I think there's a real opportunity because, as so many of you have pointed out to me, this market was a real pioneer, right? There's a advanced level of sophistication and taste and appreciation of fashion. But for whatever reason, over the last 15 or 20 years, other markets have been racing ahead to kind of develop and create their own local industry. And so I guess my advice, Louise, is seize upon what you have had here historically in Kuwait. Build upon that heritage, build upon that platform, and really take advantage of the local creativity. And we're going to meet some of the young designers later. It's clear that there's creativity here. It's clear that there's an appetite here from a customer standpoint. There's even, someone told me, some local manufacturing. To build a fashion ecosystem takes a lot of things. But I think, based only on the 36 hours I've been here, a lot of the critical parts here are already present. I think what it takes now is to connect those things more explicitly, more intentionally, more strategically, and then also to make sure that you invite more people to come and experience the market. And so an event like this, I think, is a real step forward because I'm really touched to be invited to be here, and I know that there's people here from other parts of the region. But keep doing events like these, because I think it's only by engaging with the international fashion community and bringing people here and having them experience it and see it firsthand. Like, our industry is a physical, tactile, relationship-driven industry. There's only so much you can do via social media. So my advice is to continue to build on this platform, to take that blank slate and start telling the stories that some of you have been talking to me about over the last 36 hours.
That was great. And is it important to look at exporting
Could
as
I,
well?
could I get some water, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
To look at, obviously, we import lots of luxury goods here, lots of fashion. You'll see every designer represented. What does it take to get to a position where Kuwait is starting to export its own vision, its own creativity, its own brands? How do we build that ecosystem?
Well, I think first, and you mentioned this earlier, is I wouldn't focus on the external market. My advice always, and I've said this to designers in India and designers in China, the most important thing is to focus on the customers that are closest to you. And we've all seen during the pandemic how important local customers have become to the fashion industry, wherever you go in the world, right? Everyone has been focused on engaging the customers in their own markets because that's the only customer they had. But the other reason why I advise countries like Kuwait to focus on local customers first is because those are the customers for whom you're going to be able to develop the most unique and purposeful garments and products that then you can take to other parts of the world. But if you focus on reaching the global market first, one, you're trying to make two steps. Like in management consulting, we always have these like 2x2 matrices, right? And so it's like, you're going to move into a new industry and you're going to move into a new market. Like focus on that first box, which is like the local customer and the local market, and really try to master that first. Once you've got that figured out, once you've figured out what you're really, really good at, I met a couple of designers here last night who told me that, their first customers were, Al Othman or, Al Astor, or like some of the local stores here in the region. Once you've got that, you've really developed a base, then you can build off of that. And, the smart buyers and the smart participants in the market outside of Kuwait, they'll understand what it means to be in Al Othman or what it means to be in some of these other stores in the region. And so that will be like a checkpoint for you. So I wouldn't focus on the global market first. I'd focus on the local market first.
Okay. Leading on from that, I'm going to ask two more and then I'm handing over. Looking at China, because China is perhaps an incredible example of a nation that has developed these domestic businesses that have now gone incredibly wide globally. We look at the valuation of Shein, etc. I appreciate it's a big jump from where we are today to where China is, but what are the learnings through that model and what's happened there in terms of where the Middle East could take the fashion industry?
That is such a good question. So when I first started visiting China for my work back in 2007, if you look at that market in 2007, you look at that market today, so 15 years later, complete transformation on so many different levels. And actually, I used to go to China almost every 6 months. And even in a 6-month period, you'd see a transformation. I mean, that market was moving so fast. I think the biggest thing that changed, though, was what the customers were looking for. So in the early days, the Chinese customers was really consuming, and I use the word consuming intentionally, consuming luxury as a signal of having arrived from a wealth standpoint, of having arrived from a, understanding what Gucci is or what Vuitton is. And that's part of what you might call the discernment curve in the fashion industry, where customers, when they first experience fashion or get interested in fashion, especially at the luxury end, they're more interested in fashion as an expression of wealth. But what happened very quickly in China was fashion became a form of self-expression, right? It wasn't just about saying, I'm rich. It was about saying, I have an identity. It was about saying, this is who I am. Right? And this is my taste level. And this is my level of sophistication, that I understand that if I buy these selvage jeans from this particular store in this neighborhood in Tokyo, that says something about me, right? The other thing that happened was Chinese customers went from coveting international brands to coveting Chinese brands. And there's a real pride, like national pride that's developed in China about not just wearing globally renowned brands, but by wearing locally created brands. And I think that's something that we will see more and more in this market as well. I think we're already seeing it with events like Fashion Trust Arabia, which have really put the spotlight on designers from the region. I think the first thing you do is you have to really just bring those designers together. You have to put a spotlight on them. You have to pick the best ones and give them a platform to succeed, and then they can really build businesses. And I think there's a real opportunity here, as there was in China, as customer taste evolves, to really focus on cultivating local designers. So I think there's a real opportunity in that.
Absolutely. And last one, possibly the biggest one. Business of Fashion, as I'm sure everyone knows, publishes an annual report called The State of Fashion with McKinsey, which gives an overview of the global industry. In 2 minutes, Imran, give us a condensation of where the global industry is for 2022, so everyone has a takeaway of what they need to know.
Yeah, I will try to do that in 2 minutes. It's a 160-page report, so but you can download it online if you need it. So as Louise mentioned, every year in December we publish a report called The State of Fashion in partnership with McKinsey. And when we kind of envisioned what this report should be about, we had seen a lot of reports in the industry which kind of said, this is what's happened. This is the market size. This is what's happened in this market. We wanted to create a forward-looking report. We wanted to create a report that you could pick it up and kind of have a window into the future. And so we make predictions. It was inspired a little bit by, I read every December, The Economist publishes this publication called The World In, and it's like The World in 2022. So we did The State of Fashion 2022 in December. So it's already about 4 or 5 months out of date now. But some of the things that we were obviously thinking about when we put that report together is, what are the really defining, important topics that are on the mind of executives? Like, what are they grappling with? And apart from the fact that we projected a rebound for the fashion industry globally, which is happening, we could not predict the war in Ukraine. We could not predict that inflation would reach all-time highs. So there's some things that we're just not able to do. But there were 2 areas which we placed specific focus on, which I'd love to talk about. The first is technology, and some of you will see there's an additional report here called The State of Fashion Technology, which we published in May. The fashion industry has historically invested around 1.5% of its revenues in technological investments. We're projecting that the fashion industry is going to double its investment in technology to about 3% of revenues. That is a lot of money. And the reason that's happening is a lot of the technological innovation that's happened in fashion up until now has been focused on the customer interface. So, how do I sell to the customer? How do I market to the customer through digital advertising or performance marketing on social media channels? Now there's a lot more technological innovation happening inside the industry. And for those of you who are buyers or merchandisers, you know that still a lot of the industry is run on spreadsheets. Pretty inefficient, right? Pretty basic. And so there's all sorts of companies out there that are now trying to figure out how to optimize and use technology inside the fashion industry around, using AI, for example, to predict which products you should make so that you make the right products and you waste less and there's less that goes on sale. Or, of course, there's a lot of talk about the metaverse and investments in the metaverse, which is a whole new world in which the fashion industry is focusing. And so, yes, you can create NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and other products, but there's also ways to use the metaverse to interact with your customers in a different way. It's new forms of marketing. So as we look ahead over the next 5 years or so, we're seeing that fashion industries are going to double their investments in technology because the technology acceleration that we've seen in the world over the last 20 years, it's only going to get faster. Technology is only going to become a more and more important part of our lives and the way we run our companies. So that's one big theme that came out. Related to that is around sustainability. And yesterday, actually, the Business of Fashion published our annual sustainability index. And what we do is this year we analyze 30 publicly traded companies. And we look at those 30 publicly traded companies and we evaluate them on 200 data points. And those data points include the targets that they have set around sustainability across 6 different categories. It's very nerdy. And so if you want to see there's like a massive spreadsheet with all this data, but basically what we're trying to do is understand what goals companies have set. Are those goals ambitious enough? And what progress are they making against those goals? Last year we looked at 15 companies. This year we looked at 30 companies. And for younger customers in particular, or your employees, this is the defining topic of our time, right? And over the last couple of years, obviously, we've all been focused on a global health crisis and a resulting economic crisis. And now there's a war happening in Europe, and there's record high inflation. So the world is very complex, but we must not forget that there's also a climate crisis. And the fashion industry happens to be one of the industries in the world that is amongst the most polluting industries on the planet. And so if we as an industry do not take critical, urgent action now and do our part in changing the trajectory of carbon emissions, waste, chemical outputs, like all of the things that this industry happens to create by virtue of the fact that we create physical products, we're going to be contributing to a climate catastrophe that is only 8 years away at this stage. So that's the other big theme. A lot of, when I first started talking about sustainability with executives a decade ago, it wasn't even on their radar. And if at best, there was a small group of sustainability workers in a separate team in the basement somewhere, that has now risen to a CEO level agenda point. And so executives in this industry are finally starting to really think carefully about how the industry needs to change in order for us to do our part to avoid this climate catastrophe. And it all sounds very serious and scary, but that's because it is scary. And we just can't lose sight of it. It's really important.
Yeah. And coming back to your point about being a blank slate and starting to build an industry and to define its roots, what an opportunity Kuwait has to put sustainability at the heart of that as we look to build the potential of the industry here.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Imran. I have time for 3 short questions, and I do ask that you please do keep them brief and concise, if at all possible. Show of hands if you would like to ask a question, and I'll send a microphone round. Anyone brave enough out there to go first? Would anyone like to? Shall I do the first one? Here we have a question here from Manu. Thank you so much. Could we have a microphone? 1, 2, 3, 4th row back, please. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name. I know it, but for the crowd, your name and introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Manolis Lidakis from Harvey Nichols Kuwait. And I would like to know your views on the rapid growth of digital retail, how it's influencing the traditional brick-and-mortar retail. We have 2 types of consumers, the ones who prefer to shop online, and the traditional ones, the older generation, who like to visit the stores and physically try on. So how do you see this influencing the long term? Thank you.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, right? Because if you'd asked me that question before the pandemic, my answer might have been a bit different. And maybe I would have agreed that we have one type of customer that likes to shop in stores and another type of customer that likes to shop online. But during the pandemic, I talked to my mom, She lives in Canada. She never wanted to shop for anything online. Not groceries, nothing. But the pandemic forced her to learn. You know, I always said to her, like, why do you go to the grocery store? You can just order them and they'll deliver. You know, she's older now. They'll just deliver them to your house. No, I like to go to the store. But during the pandemic, that wasn't possible, right? And I think what the pandemic did is it really educated a lot of people around the convenience of shopping online. But also it underscored what shopping online doesn't offer. Right? And actually, I don't think of the customer as one who likes to shop online and one who likes to shop in the store. I think we have one group of customers now. Their customer journey can start in the store where they try something on because they were browsing, but they're not sure. But they can't get that dress out of their head. And they keep thinking about it. And they couldn't be bothered to go back to the store. So they'll just go online. They know exactly what size it was. They can find the colorway and they can just order it because it's convenient. But you also likewise have other people who are on Instagram and they've seen that, I don't know, some celebrity is wearing the new Chloe Nama shoe and they love that shoe. And it's sustainable, by the way, and it's by Gabriella Hearst and it's really cool. But they're not sure how it's going to fit. And so they look at it online and they actually decide they want to go into the store to actually complete the purchase. And so what you have are journeys that are not entirely physical or entirely digital. You have journeys that kind of cross the boundaries of digital and physical. And that's just the way we all are. And I think coming out of the pandemic, as things are opening up, the retail stores in most of the cities I'm going to, they're full. People are excited to go back into stores again, but they've also been educated and now understand if they were hesitant to shop online before, exactly what convenience and special features that has. So if I'm focused on getting something fast, getting something tomorrow, I'm really busy, then I can shop online. I can have everything delivered to me. I can try it on at home. I can return the stuff that doesn't fit. But if I want an experience, if I want to discover something, if I want to go out shopping with my friends or with my family, sitting around as a family or a group of friends shopping online, that's not fun, right? So when shopping becomes an experiential thing, when it becomes something that you want to do with other people, then you go into a store. And that's nice too. And so I don't think we have to choose. I think as businesses, what we have to learn is how to make these journeys seamless. How to make it so that we understand who that customer is when they walk in, that we have all of the data to understand that customer bought this much from us last year online, this much from us in the store. We understand what their preferences are. We might have a little profile on them saying they like to have a cappuccino when they walk into this. Understanding the customer and using data, and this is where this technology point comes in, right? All of these investments in technology are to help us do what this industry has always done, which is really serve customers. So that's the way I think about it.
Thank you, Imran. You have just exactly described my shopping journey.
Oh, right.
Any more? Would anyone else? Yes, please. 1, 2, 3, 6 rows back. Could we have a microphone, please, sir, over here? Thank you. Here we go. It's coming in. Thank you.
Hello, hi, Imran. First of all, thank you for coming. I actually came all the way from Saudi Arabia just to be here with you guys.
Thank you.
I have a question. As for a startup fashion brand, do you advise that I should go direct to consumer or find a retailer and all of that due to the margin and all of the retail
Yeah,
stuff?
it's a very interesting, important question, and it really depends. It depends on what your business strategy is. I think what's definitely true is every fashion business should have a direct relationship with their customers. Wholesalers can always play a role in your business because, I'm trying to go to Al Othman later today, and I've heard about it my whole life. But I've never been to the store, and everyone was telling me last night, you go into that store and it's beautifully curated. Only an amazing retailer can create that kind of experience because they can pick lots of things from different brands. And if you are present in a store that fits with your business strategy, that is curated in a way that showcases you and helps you reach a customer you can't reach, the wholesaler is really important. But I wouldn't underestimate the value of having a direct relationship with your customer, not least because, one, yes, if you sell directly to your customer, you're going to earn a higher margin. Two, if you sell directly to your customer, you're going to have more information and data about them. And three, if you sell directly to your customer, you're going to get feedback directly from your customer on your product and how to make it better. And if you leave all of the relationships with your customers to wholesalers, it's very hard to get that feedback. It's very hard to own that data. And we've been talking about how in the technology age, how data is so important. Having that data is critical to any business now. So that doesn't mean wholesale isn't important. It can be a part of your overall retail strategy, but I think every business now should have a direct relationship with their customers, if only just to have an email address so you can reach them. Yeah.
Great advice. Thanks, Imran. Anyone? One more. We have last question here. Thank you so much. If we could go here, please, sir. Thank you. That's wonderful.
Hi, Imran. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you for being here. Quick question, and I don't know, hopefully this is beneficial to everyone. With technology being very helpful for businesses to reach more consumers, and in a day and age where social media's insurgence makes brands have a platform to reach more consumers, when it comes to luxury, my question is, what is luxury nowadays, and what is your definition of luxury, considering the accessibility is on a much wider scale, and in my opinion, it's become more democratized at this point. Where is the, let's say, end in terms of when brands need to kind of stop pushing product?
Such a good question. And I think a very pertinent question, because I was talking about sustainability earlier. And I think people have this notion that fast fashion is the unsustainable part of the fashion industry.
That's the one, just to end my question, exactly what you just said now. What is the definition of luxury and what is the definition of fast fashion at this point?
In fact, I remember I did some analysis years ago that showed how luxury had adopted some of the elements of the fast fashion model, more frequent drops, a lot more product, a lot more assortment. And fast fashion had adopted some elements of the luxury model, which was like high-end looking campaigns, aspirational imagery, marketing, all of that. And I think what you've seen is a convergence. The products and the quality of the products may be very different, but there's similarities in the terms of the way they go to the market. And the way customers sometimes see fashion as a form of entertainment, which is, I think this is something that fundamentally, we've just got to buy less stuff that's better made, that's going to last longer, and that can have a life even beyond our use of that product so that it can be resold on other platforms or it can be passed down to other generations. Because you call it the democratization of luxury. I think fundamentally, let's be really honest, in some respects, some of the luxury brands are basically mass consumer brands now, making millions and millions of products every year. And they, if you sit down with a luxury executive and you have this conversation with them, and I have the opportunity to do that from time to time, they'll say, "What? Oh, we're very different from fast fashion. Our products are much higher quality, they're less harmful to the environment." And in some cases that's true, but our sustainability index shows that a lot of these companies in luxury are just as bad as the fast fashion companies.
I think just to end it, sorry if I'm taking a bit longer, but When it comes to production, there's obviously a ceiling in terms of the amount or optimal capacity that luxury brands can produce
Yeah.
within that sustainability index. But so that's where, that conversation that you had, and I've had similar conversation with certain executives where they kind of don't really have an answer because
Well, do you
at
know
the
what
end-
Mr. Pino said to me?
Yeah.
And I can say this because he said it to me on a television show, and it's in the public domain. I said to him, I said, well, you're a publicly traded company. You're measured on quarterly results. Yes, it's a family business, so you can take a long-term perspective and you can be more measured about it. But let's face it, like Balenciaga is selling thousands of pairs of sneakers, right? And every sneaker you create is having some kind of impact. And I said, well, how is this ever going to be sustainable? And basically he said to me, it's a question of value and volume. And I think this was a really honest response. He said, basically, we need to make fewer products that cost more money, that are going to last a much longer time period. And I think the same thing could apply in the fast fashion space. In fact, much more important that it applies there because we've created a system in fast fashion which is just fundamentally unsustainable, which is where people buy a garment, like a t-shirt, that costs $3. They wear it once. Because it costs $3, it's likely being made in unconscionable conditions where someone is not being paid a living wage, where someone is not being working in an environment that's safe, and we've seen that in Bangladesh and in other fast fashion manufacturing centers. Like all of this has to change, and this is what I was talking about with the index that we put together. The second lowest performing category in our sustainability index is workers' rights. The worst performing category in our sustainability index is waste. Those are, a lot of the companies have set really ambitious goals around carbon emissions, and that's the strongest performing category, which is great, because I think a lot of the attention of the world is on, CO2 and carbon, which is, important, don't get me wrong. But there's all of these other areas at the other end of our index, which are just not getting enough attention. And so, every item, every product we produce, whether it's an iPhone or a Chanel 255 bag, like everything has an impact, right? That's not going to change. Consumerism is not going away. So I'm not living in an ivory tower thinking everyone's going to stop buying things and we're all, But we can buy differently. We can buy less. We can buy products that last longer. We can give those products a longer life, and we can make sure fundamentally that everything that goes into the creation of that product is thoughtful and being sustainable right from the beginning, because good design is sustainable design. So all of this starts right at the conception of the product, which is why it was so interesting to talk to a lot of the designers here last night, because they were all thinking about sustainability from the get-go. There was one duo of designers that told me that everything that they made was offcuts. It's all old fabrics, it's all old cotton, it's all recycled cotton. That's the way we need to think about things now. We need to think about everything that goes in from the beginning all the way to how we keep the life of that product longer. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Imran, and thank you so much for all your incredible insights and for being here with us today. Big round of applause, please. Thank you,
Thank
Imran
you,
Ahmed,
Louise.
Business of Fashion. Thank you. We are running a little behind schedule, but I appreciate it's a long time to stay seated. So I'm going to give you 5-10 minutes to stand up, stretch your legs, grab a coffee or water, use the restroom if you need to. And if we could please be back here 11:20, 11:25, and the wonderful Ellie Saab Jr. will be joining us. So a very short break. I'm cutting it a bit shorter than the schedule. You'll come to realize I'm very bossy. And I'll see you back here shortly. Thank you so much.